So I just want to welcome everyone. My name is Shauna McCabe, and I'm the director of the Art Gallery of Guelph. And I'd like to welcome you all, as well as our guests, Rhéanne Chartrand and Anong Beam, tonight. And tonight, I'd like to begin by offering a land acknowledgement on behalf of the Art Gallery of Guelph, which is hosting this dialogue. The statement is really crucial for cultural institutions, as it really speaks to the ongoing effects of colonialism that underpins the history of museums and art museums. Not only have cultural institutions utilized deeply colonial methods of representation, but because of their authority, these narratives have often been accepted as truth, informing policies and practices which have ongoing effects. So Guelph is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history and home to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. And as we gather together virtually tonight, I'd like to acknowledge that the gallery resides on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We also recognize we reside within the Dish with One Spoon territory and offer our respect to our Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Métis neighbors as we strive to strengthen our relationships with them. We express our gratitude and recognize our responsibility for the stewardship of the lands on which we live, work, and create. And as we're all connected and yet physically dispersed, it's also a good moment to recognize our collective responsibility to the calls to action issued by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on Indigenous residential schools to never forget to hold governments and colonial forces to account and to seek redress and healing for injustices. And this is a legacy that was central to the life and work of artist Carl Beam, who's our focus tonight. Before I turn it over to Rhéanne to start, I briefly wanted to tell you a little bit about each of them, and they will tell you more. Rhéanne Chartrand is a Métis curator based between Hamilton and Toronto with over 12 years of experience curating multidisciplinary and intercultural exhibitions, showcases, festivals, and programs. She's currently serving as the Hatch Curator of Indigenous Art and Culture at the Royal Ontario Museum. And she previously served as the Curator of Indigenous Art at the McMaster Museum of Art from 2017 to 2023. Her most recent exhibitions include NEPA 2020, What Sustains Us, co-curated by Asiniak, and We Are Made of Stardust, and guest curation of the 2022 official selection for Imaginative Film and Media Arts Festival. Broadly, her curatorial work focuses on the praxis of survivance, Indigenous epistemes, relational aesthetics, representational politics, acknowledgement, and gratitude. Let's see here. So parallel to her curatorial work, Chartrand serves as a sessional instructor at McMaster, at Toronto Metropolitan University, and the University of Toronto. She's a co-founder of the Shushkitu Collective, an equity-seeking and advocacy group organizing on behalf of Métis artists and art workers to increase Métis representation, capacity, and flourishing within the Canadian arts milieu. Previously, she served as a board member and secretary with the Indigenous Curatorial Collective from 2018 to 2022. She's a citizen of the Métis Nation of Ontario, and her paternal family names are Chartrand and Gervais. Anong Beam was raised by artist parents, Carl Beam and Anne Beam, with a meaningful connection to both her artistic familiar roots and ancestral heritage. Her artwork has been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions, often in the form of oil paintings that incorporate different image-making approaches, including photo transfer, printmaking, and collage, which have been shaped by the physical history of her home, its surrounding landscapes, as well as the relationship between water and memory. In addition to her artistic work, Beam has been actively involved in the local community of M'Chigeeng on Manitoulin Island and is well known for her curatorial work. In 2007, she was one of the founders of an English and Ojibwe language radio station in M'Chigeeng First Nation. From 2016 to 17, Beam served as the art director of the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation, and in 2017, she transitioned to become the executive director. Later that same year, Beam also launched her own line of watercolor and oil paints, which are now famous, called Beam Paints. Beam has also been an outspoken advocate for the preservation of Indigenous archaeologies and Indigenous ceramics within local communities. So I'll turn it over to you, Rhéanne.
Merci miigwech, Shauna. It's great to be here. I'm so glad that we were able to reschedule this talk. I know I'm super excited to have this conversation with you, Anong. I hope you're equally excited to have this conversation with me. So yes, welcome everyone. This conversation was prompted by an exhibition that just recently closed actually at the Art Gallery of Guelph, called Carl Beam Pieces of a Puzzle, which was curated by Sally Frater, who at the time was the curator of contemporary art with the AGG. And so in conversation with Sally, and myself and Anong, we decided we wanted to do a chat about Carl's work and his life, his legacy, and his contributions to Indigenous art. So that's what we're here to talk about today, is all the amazing things that Carl has gifted us through his practice in just so many different ways. And I myself have curated his work several times, and I find myself constantly returning to his body of work because I think it's just so rich with things to talk about. So I'm sure we'll get into a bit more of that. But Anong, I welcome. Hi.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here, and I know a lot of things have moved around and this is rescheduled, but I'm really grateful that we're getting a chance to do it. And we had a little test conversation before, and it was so much fun. So I'm really happy to be here and to talk about my favorite artist and my dad, whose practice I feel the same way about, that I keep learning about and understanding more as I progress in my own career and my own interests, and also as I cross a lot of milestones that I saw him go through, like certain ages of children and certain things like exhibitions and things. And I think about him quite often. And we talked about this before, but I guess I would mention it, that we do have an upcoming publication about Carl Beam, Art and Life, and it should be coming out soon in some form or another. It'll be out.
I
Yeah.
can't wait.
Yeah.
I've known about this for so long that I'm just like waiting eagerly to have the book.
Yeah, so it's he's very much on my mind, and we're coming up onto I think it's been about 30 years since a lot
Wow.
of the big exhibitions that he did, and
Yeah.
so many things have happened in the past few years that really reference and relate to his artwork. So I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you.
Oh, I'm so excited. I think we've got some images we'll kind of shuffle through as we go, but for now, I just want to give a shout out to Sally Frater for supporting this conversation, Nicole and Shauna at AGG as well, and the whole social media team for kind of getting behind this and helping us make this happen. So I guess where I kind of want to start is kind of thinking back to what it was like growing up with Carl. So, it goes without saying that he's arguably, or not arguably, undoubtedly the most important contemporary Indigenous artist of the last 70 years. But to you, he was dad. So what was it like growing up with such an incredible mind and maker?
It's something that I kind of unpack more and more as I go on, and definitely becoming a parent myself.
Yeah.
And it's taken me a really long time, to understand some of the oddities, I think, of it. That he was a survivor of residential school, and that that itself inflicted an awful lot of things. That he had a certain level of PTSD, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't go into large buildings. He had a really tough time with institutional looking buildings.
Mm.
If we stayed in hotels, we couldn't go in the elevator. There had to be stairs out. So you could never feel trapped, so I guess, and
Mm-hmm.
always needed to know how to get out of a building. And I just kind of took that as a normal way, but it's, that definitely comes from that experience. that, and he was so multifaceted. There's so many artists, I think, who specifically work in one medium or one practice, and his life, even though it was like he knew he didn't have a lot of time, and he actually had a few different interactions with people in like a community setting where
Mhm.
his community believed and his family knew that he was going to do something important. And he had the feeling that he wasn't going to live a really long time. When he met my mom, he actually said he felt like he was probably going to pass away in a few years. And
Oh,
he,
wow.
yeah, so he didn't think that he was going to be there very long. And he ended up lasting a lot longer than he thought, but still it was less than we would have liked. So there was like there was an there was a tension to the time, that there really was a feeling like there was no time to lose.
Yeah, like a looming sense of immediacy,
Yeah,
or the need to like experience the fullness of life while he could.
yeah, and he was so aggressively intellectual and
Yeah.
serious about his pursuit. Our house in the early days, when he did the Columbus Suite, which is heavily referenced in this exhibition,
Mhm.
we had no furniture in the house except a kitchen table and chairs, but there was no couch, there was no television, there was no sofa, or there was an etching press in the living room and the kitchen table, and that was it, and
Mhm.
futons on the floor. So he continued with that same focus all the way through, and even up until the time that I took over the house after he passed on, there still wasn't a couch in the house. He never had one.
He never wanted to sit idle, let's say.
No, he never wanted to sit. Like, he would sit down and maybe and play guitar. He really enjoyed
Yeah.
music, but there was always something that had to be done. And even if it was just thinking, and that's something that I
Mhm.
think was interesting too, that he made such a space for thinking. And he would say something, he said, people think that they're thinking all the time, but they're not. He said,
Mhm.
there's this take learning an idea and then pondering that is not having an original thought. And he said, very rarely does anyone ever have a truly original thought. And if you
Mhm.
could have one in your life, that would be a really great accomplishment, to get an original thought. So
Mhm.
even to think that is really odd for, a Northern Ontario man who really wasn't on a path to become an artist. He was
Yeah.
on a path to be a laboring person, to work in the trades, and he took such a massive change in his life towards art.
But all of that sort of, that pathway to becoming a laborer, or we could say even a maker, a doer, I
Mhm.
think you do see that in his work and in his willingness to kind of just experiment with all things, and nothing kind of seemed off limits to Carl, as we were talking in our pre-chat, even delving into ceramics. Like
Mhm.
I'm so excited to explore that more. And I've seen the old catalogs from the 80s of he was doing the ceramics simultaneous to his works on canvas and his etching. So it was never like
Mhm.
he just did one thing at one time, to your point. He was kind of doing all things
Right.
all at once, whatever the medium could convey the message
Yeah,
or
and
the choice.
things were happening with such a thickness and an
Mhm.
intensity. And part of that is because he didn't have a professorship or
Right.
a yeah, and I think he probably would have. He was on track for that. He was at that time, from our community at least, there weren't a lot of people going to art school. It was
Mhm.
pretty unusual. And then he was on track to do an MFA, and probably would have led into something. But I think when they rejected it, he proposed to do a thesis on Fritz Scholder, And he
Oh,
was,
wow. Okay. I didn't
yeah,
know that. That is so
yeah.
fascinating.
He proposed
Okay.
it to do the thesis, and he was told by the university that he would have to pick a like a European artist that wasn't serious enough. It wouldn't have enough validity to be a thesis project. And that was like, wow. And he walked away. And that's when
Yeah.
he became his professional. He started being really became professional as an artist.
Yeah.
So he that closed the door to academia that he
Mhm.
didn't want to pursue. And the intensity of needing to take care of your family as a
Mhm.
practicing artist without another job. My entire life, I never saw him or my mother work, have a job
Mhm.
beyond their own art. So it's funny, they both referenced it in different ways in their
Yeah.
journals and things, which are really neat. One of them, my dad's journal, was really neat. There's a page that's a sequential itemization of everything that he has and doesn't, like an inventory, right down
Mhm.
to he only has like 78 cents or something. And then at the end, he says, "It's a beautiful day, and I'm outside playing with this kid across the street." And he says, "I really need an intervention, like a divine, I need something to come to me."
Mhm.
And that was about the time I think he was working on the Columbus project, and
Mhm.
he was really encouraged by my aunt. Uh, he thought he was going to sell the etching press, and she said, "Get to work."
That's
So
what you need is an auntie to tell you what to do.
yeah, yeah, and he did. He got to work, and you know, this amazing body of work came about.
Yeah. Yeah. So this one is Sitting Bull and Einstein. So this one I believe is all this was part of the Columbus Week, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, there's my images are out of order, as was this one. This one was floating around on social media as a promo image for the talk.
This
Um
this is
yeah,
kind of interesting. This one, it's hard to read the text on there, but it
yeah.
has something about it was something about his Dear Columbus and
Mm,
something about the voyage being doomed from the beginning.
mhm.
And
I think that that's my favorite thing about Carl's work is, and we're jumping ahead all over my
yeah,
question
that's
right now.
okay.
That's okay. But I think that that's the one thing I absolutely love about his work is the fact that he annotates and he comments and he shares his thoughts, and it's like it's almost at times like free verse poetry, and
Yeah.
I love that because as a very cerebral intellectual person, I connect in with that, and he engages me in thinking about those ideas with him. And I think that's why I come back to his work so much, because I take something away from it each and every time.
Mhm. I completely agree, and it's something in the forthcoming book about his work that I talk about more extensively, that he was incredibly literary, and our house is full of books. Even when we had no furniture, we had a big bookshelf with a lot of books. We were always going to libraries. We were going to used booksellers. There was an awful lot of reverence for reading and books. And there's so many works of philosophy and so many philosophic texts that he was really reading and going through. And I think there's like 7 copies of Heidegger's Being in Time in the house, seven
Wow.
or more. And he loved reading those ideas. And something that's interesting too, he also loved James Joyce and Samuel Beckett and differing approaches to literary constructions, which, considering English is his second language as well. And he also learned some Latin at the Spanish residential school too. And something that I love about his text is he was almost never discussed as a text-based artist, but
Mm,
there's text as a visual device in every single work. I mean, I'm really hard pressed to find any work that's not a study. He has watercolor studies, maybe with no text, but finished work that was presented to the public almost entirely, without exception, has a text-based aspect.
Mm-hmm.
None of it was planned ahead. It was all stream of consciousness.
Yeah, I
And
remember you telling me that, and I found
yeah,
that so fascinating.
it's so amazing, right? Because these are really final things. Like, he's writing in ink on paper and you can't go back and erase. Sometimes he'll scratch out a word.
Yeah,
And
I've seen that.
I've seen that every once in a while. He'll scribble
Yeah.
one out. But by and large, even on the big oil paintings, he's writing in oil on canvas. And it was straight stream of consciousness from that moment, which I think really put his it just creates an intimacy that lasts through time
Mm-hmm.
because of the immediacy. And my mom, she was so in love with him and so in love with his art that there are journals that she has inscribed. This is dedicated, or this is it's basically dedicated to the creative spirit and my husband Carl, and as it flows through him. And she documents, transcribes the work after he's written it. So a painting is about to be sold to an art gallery or a collector. She takes her notebook and she copies down the text from the work. And there's that neat record of some of these things that have gone off into the secondary market.
No, I love that because yeah, if they're collected by private collectors, you lose access to that. So it's so
Yeah.
amazing Anne was able to, thought ahead and like took the time
Yeah.
to transcribe all that from the works.
Yeah, they were really, they documented that time and their work so thoroughly that I
Yeah.
think the seriousness that they took their work and each other
Mm-hmm.
uh, really left an incredible legacy. Their photographic archive of all of the early 80s through to the 90s is
Mm-hmm.
it's thousands and thousands of photographs. This is a pre-digital era.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have money for gas and a couch and, things like that, but you're buying color film and you're documenting your artwork, like, that's where the priorities were.
Have you ever, this is a total personal question.
Yeah.
Because I'm my kind of bread and butter is art in the 80s,
Mhm.
specifically photography. Have you thought to do anything with the photographic
Yeah,
archive?
they have it. Well, it's all been digitized, so
Amazing.
that's amazing. And the originals were all donated. Well, technically they still belong to me, but they're at the National Gallery, the archives there.
Amazing.
And I really want to make them accessible to the public for
Yeah.
research, because a lot of these, there were photographs of him at Land Spirit Power and there's pictures of him clowning and having fun with all of the artists there. And
Oh, I would love to see those. That would
yeah,
just be like one
it's
of those
definitely
iconic moments,
yeah,
that
yeah,
you're like, I wish I could have been there, but I was
yeah,
only a kid.
yeah. Well, yeah, and it was really incredible to be there with them. And when I was there, I was a kid. It was really
Mhm.
funny and amazing because they knew how it was it was just such an intense time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So as an artist yourself, in what ways do you feel that Carl influenced your own practice? I mean, I think both your parents did, most
Yeah.
undoubtedly, and I know that your mom and your dad kind of inspired Beam paints in some way because they were creating their own
Yeah.
paints early on. So just maybe a little bit about you and how they've influenced how you
Sure.
approach your art.
Yeah, definitely. I think it took me a long time to kind of find my own style because they both had such a I think I understand now. I learned more as an apprentice versus the current state of education in North America is very academy based.
Mm-hmm.
So I had more of like a craftsperson's education in art, which is really process based, and you start by kind of working like the people you're apprenticing to. my early work really looked an awful lot like my mom and dad's. And then somewhere around the time that my sons were born, I really came into, I felt like I developed my own way of seeing and relating in a visual way. And I really felt like I was able to claim space that my dad carved out, because he really struggled with the art market and the expectations of what native art should look like. And I think this kind of loops back into your question later about self-portraits. But there was so many times where I remember him showing work to potential collectors, and they would just be like, what is this? I need to see some Indian art, and this is not it. And he would say, like, he would he was he was a really bombastic, very large individual. And it's so funny because people always remember him taller than he was, or he took up a room. And I had seen him be incredibly brusque with people. Like, that's the lightest way to say it, where he would just tell them where to go. And somehow he would say it in the full 4 letters, and somehow it would be like they wouldn't even land on them. They would go like, oh. And so they wouldn't be rebuffed. They would come back and they would want to know why. And then there would be conversations. It was really interesting.
Yeah, this work here is Big Meal. It's a work on canvas. So as Anong was saying, Carl recurrently used self-portraiture in his work, and I think that that's one of the things I quite love about his work as well, is kind of turning the gaze on himself and really critiquing that idea of who and what is quote unquote Indigenous. And I do think that gets into one of the questions that I had about how this sort of tension between the art market expecting something of Carl, expecting a certain type of art, and him just basically, two thumbs or two fingers up to that idea, and really carving out a space of his own for what he wanted to say. And I do think that goes back to what you were alluding to in terms of apprenticeship, and him being a self-taught artist. And so, in what ways do you think, like, not following an academic path freed him or restricted him in terms of his creative thinking and practices, his making practices?
Well, it's interesting because he definitely he was this blend of self-taught and school, because he did go to art school. He got his BFA. He was about to get his MFA. He went to more art school than I did. And I think that at the moment when he couldn't continue further, it almost echoes this thing that happened to him before when he was in residential school. And he comes to this point where you're supposed to go along in that system until until you get to the end. And he ended up dropping out. But instead of being a dropout who went and worked for, doing labor jobs, he rejoined in grade 10 through correspondence. He ends up graduating ahead of the class. So he completes the studies faster on his own than he would have actually in school. And I think that happens when the doors shut on him in MFA. He's so voracious about pursuing himself as a serious artist and seeing himself that way. Then something happens around 1984, 85. It's post this big love story with my mother where they meet and they run off to the States, and they're married 2 months after they met, and then like 9 months later I'm born, and they're moving around. And it's the photographs of the time are like just incredible because they're so very much in love. And they're painting together, and his work really, it brightens. And I think the works just before that were very pessimistic.
Yes, I've curated some of those.
Yeah, I think some of them are called, one of them is called Pathetic Shit, and the other one is called like, it has a lot of negative stuff in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he goes into stellar associations and new
I
work.
love that work. That's like one of my all-time faves.
Yeah, and he comes through all of that, and he gets to this point where he starts to discover, I mean, literally, he knew the work, the Anne Frank's diary, but through the exhibition he has that goes to, it's exhibited at the Meervaart in Holland. And forgive me if I get something wrong here, I don't have any notes, but
That's
we go to
okay.
Anne Frank's house, and I'm 5, and we're there, and it was really intense for him, and it was intense for me, because at that point he had already given me, at 5 years old, he'd already given me the Diary of Anne Frank, and I'd already read it. And you know, there was so much reading going on at the house. It was just really very literary. At that point, he starts to make these connections. He gives um a press conference in front of the Anne Frank house. And I have photographs of this. Like, it really happened. There were all these cameras, and he was there, and he tells the European press about Canadian residential schools. And he starts talking about how there is this ongoing abuse of power, and that the lessons learned here need to be transmitted back, and all of that. And that's 1985. So he comes back to Canada, and it's still, no one is saying anything about these experiences. He's really freed by reading that whole experience. He's inspired, and he starts to relate his own experience, his trauma, in an incredibly diary-based personal way. And that goes into this incredible thing that very few uh Indigenous artists, or let's even say very few artists who have been from a population, a marginalized population, are able to relay that experience to the wider public without creating a shameful, you know, without being like, oh, you, for shame on you, this happened to me. Instead, there's an amazing way that he could approach his own experiences while including the viewer. That the viewer didn't feel like they were being chided, or instead they felt that they were with him, and they were going on this journey of understanding. It's I don't even really understand all of the mechanisms that have to happen to create that connection, and that personal connection, it's beyond space and time. It's what happens in great art.
He struck that balance between like the personal and political so well, and commenting on these broader global issues, and tying that to some sort of personal narrative, of some sort of personal reflection on the world. And I think he did that successfully over and over and over again. And I remember in one of our pre-discussions, you were talking about him being really interested in semiotics. And, you know, that brings up this conversation of his recurring use of religious imagery and iconography as a critique for organized religion and its effect on Indigenous peoples. But he found that way to kind of like critique Western culture and Christianity whilst also advance an Indigenous view, but it was never heavy-handed to one or the other. And I guess was semiotics the solution? I don't
I think so, because I think like one of my favorite, something that I kind of come to understand later, and this is through talking a lot with him about language, and he was active in starting a radio station that I worked on with him later that was just Ojibwe language. And I think, like, when you look at these works here and you see, especially on the right, to the right of Sitting Bull, the unexplained,
Yeah.
if you imagine his experience to be, 8 years old and all of a sudden dropped into a Jesuit Catholic existence that's only happening in English, where he's also the altar boy. So he's participating in an incredibly intense, symbolic, rich with symbols that he has no understanding of, and it's just coming as a barrage of symbols. And I think whenever you encounter the other, you don't have access to the meaning of all of these semiotics. It's it's kind of like what happens when they say if a child learns one language, the child understands the word for apple and the object of the apple as being the same thing. If you have a child that learns in a bilingual situation, they understand that the word apple is not the apple. They understand the difference between the word and the object. So I think that's something that he was using semiotics to question the privilege of viewpoints, that one act of power equal one act of faith equals one act of faith is how he would explain the unexplained. And I love that there's a painting with the same imagery, and it's at the National Gallery of Canada, and it says that in Greek at the top. So everyone, when they see it, they're almost forced to feel the way he felt, observing something, seeing text, not understanding, trying to make connections. Yeah.
No, I find that so fascinating. I think, one of the lenses through which I have studied Carl's work and then subsequently curated is through the lens of survivance, or the praxis of survivance, of this sort of doing of cultural resistance, and not just surviving but thriving. And one of the things that I really loved about Carl's work, particularly through the 80s and into the 90s, but other artists were doing this too in their own ways, was this sort of not only with text and text as a visual language, but using other languages in their works, even in the case of someone like Jane Ash Portra, who was using Cree syllabics, to highlight this incommensurability or this untranslatability of certain concepts. And it goes both ways. Like, to your point, putting Greek in his work, limits who can actually understand that. And then I think that does in some way impart to the visitor, like, what it feels like to be stuck in these situations of mistranslation or a lack of ability to understand, and what that like feels like.
Yeah, and then what that means about assuming which, like, the privilege of which one is assumed to be accurate or dominant in a situation. I found that really interesting when he continued on afterwards learning Sanskrit, and he had a Sanskrit journal, and he had one, I think it's at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and it's called Bashmakri, or Reduced to Ashes. And it has, it references residential school experiences, and it has images of chiefs and archival Indigenous images. And then it says, written in Sanskrit, reduced to there's no English on it. It's the Sanskrit syllabics, and it says it means reduced to ashes. So yeah, it's really fun to go through his work. Even myself being a constant student of him for my entire life, I find different aspects and different meanings as the years go on, and it's really fun.
Yeah, so I want to call attention to the fact that the works that are sitting on the screen right now, are from the Columbus Suite, which, as Anong has been alluding to, was produced in the early 90s, which is I understand it to be a response on the part of Carl to the quincentennial of the discovery of the Americas. And what we see a lot in this body of work is sort of juxtaposition, metaphor, repetition. And I understand him to be interrogating colonization, Western politics, history, race, basically everything.
Yeah.
Environmental issues. So what do you think motivated your father to tackle such hefty subjects and issues through his work? Like, and why was that important as an Indigenous artist? Like, why was that important that he was doing that? I think that that's something really fascinating that,
Yeah,
yeah.
how wide
Yeah.
how wide his viewpoint was there. I think, it he really viewed himself as a warrior. And I think that's just it, at the heart of it. He felt
Mhm.
that was a battle that he wanted to do. Way back when he first met my mom, they moved down to the United States and they were doing ceramics down there, and they were getting along pretty well. He actually got he was represented by a pretty well-known gallery in Taos at the time, and he was selling work regularly, and they had a life that was really, anybody else would have stayed right there. They would have taken the beginnings of the stability, the new family, and things going along well. And he told my mom that they had to move back to Canada because what he was doing, his work was really important to what was happening in Canada. And I think
Mhm.
he came back because he wanted to address head on, he wanted to address his experience with residential schools. And he wanted to see it named and discussed and talked about.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and it's so interesting, in the contemporary moment where post TRC, these conversations are happening more and more, and yet, as well as I do, Indigenous artists like your dad were calling attention to these issues super early and trying to amplify those experiences, even when residential schools were still open,
Reading. Yeah.
and certain people were listening, but en masse, and I
Yeah.
think that maybe why Carl just kept visually screaming.
Yeah, he really did. Like, I think one of the works that was purchased by the National Gallery after his passing and around the time of his retrospective is a gigantic plexiglass construction, and it was called Sauvage, and it had a whitewashed gun that's a real rifle, and it's tied inside of a plexiglass construction, and it shows Hiroshima at the top, and at the bottom it shows the back of the graveyard from his residential school that he went to. And the fact that they could buy and collect that before, and then come all the way out to that many years later, 2005, all the way to just these past couple of years, where the acknowledgement of the discovery of children at residential schools and the shock that created across the nation. Meanwhile, there's a really clear, gigantic painting that's kind of
It's been the elephant in the
trying to be,
room for a long
yeah,
time.
it's been trying to be very upfront. And I really think that, I think about him so much, about what he would think about how things are gonna go, what's gonna happen next,
Yeah,
as
I agree. I would be so curious to see, what Carl thinks of the way the world has been,
yeah,
since
what he
the
thinks of
since the
AI.
TRC and kind of what's going on globally right now. Like,
Yeah.
what would he have to say?
Mm,
We can speculate, but
yeah.
I wish there was a way to know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
you know
Mhm.
um maybe turning to something that's a little less heady, is kind of going back, kind of circling back to his recurring use of himself as a subject in his work. And just kind of wondering if you can shed some light on why he repeatedly used self-portraiture. And the one story that I love so very much is the conversation between himself and Ron and Vivian.
Yeah, that happened so early on, and I think it's
Yeah.
really that those works. We're talking specifically about the self-portrait in Christian Dior bathing suit.
Yes.
That was part of his very first solo exhibition, Alter Egos, at the Thunder Bay National, what it was called back then.
Yeah.
And so that's an exhibition at the Indian Art Center. And at the time, he's a few years into his professional career, and he's having a tough time selling it. He's having a tough time being it took a really I really take my hat off to Elizabeth McLuhan for giving him that first solo show, not making it a piece in a corner somewhere, but giving him the full stage for that work. And she put that work on the cover of that catalog for that exhibition as well. And it's so incredible because he was really making a work that wasn't meant to be put in a shelf and forgotten about. It's oversized in every conceivable way. Normally, watercolors are petite. I mean, there are very few large-scale watercolors. This watercolor is on 40-inch by 60-inch paper. That alone makes it unusual. It's exquisitely rendered. There's no
Yes.
photographic work. It is a work of art. To be able to handle watercolor that well, especially when you're painting yourself as a
I know.
child, and then to have this really great text on the bottom. And I'm going to paraphrase it loosely, but it's something kind of like, I'm here. I had to do this to mark my time in this way. This is my life, and this is my work, and I'm here, and here's the proof, and where's yours? And I think he curses in there a bit too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a couple
yeah,
times.
which is great. And there it is. And there he is standing there looking at the viewer, really like, here I am. This is native art, and you're just gonna have to accept it. And then Ron Naganosh does a rebuttal, and there were rebuttals of, I think his was Carl, I couldn't afford a Christian Dior bathing suit, and he did a self-portrait in the nude. It was very abstract and funny. And then also Vivian Gray did Carl, I can't fit into my Dior Christian Dior bathing suit. And so it was a work that rippled through. It rippled through that he could do that work and have it exhibited. And I think for people in my generation and younger, it's hard to imagine a time when, as an Indigenous person, you couldn't paint whatever you want and have it be understood that that was your right. At that time, there was no contemporary Indigenous art. There was only anthropological things, and we were still under a salvage paradigm of that anthropologists were the main people dealing with contemporary native art, and it took a long time for that to change.
And your dad was certainly a catalyst to that change alongside many other artists of his generation. And I just, in my own work, looking at the 80s and early 90s, just this critical mass of artists like Carl just being like, I'm gonna swear, like, fuck this. We're gonna represent ourselves the way we want to. We're gonna say what we want to say, paint what we want to paint, create what we want to create. And you're just gonna have to, a reckoning will come, and you're just gonna have to deal with it. And it did. We've seen since that time that sort of reckoning of Indigenous art breaking out of really kind of limiting ideas of what it is. And
it's true, but I still feel like there's another shoe that hasn't fully dropped yet, where And I still get the same question sometimes that he got.
Yeah.
And somebody would
It's
look
true.
at my
That's
work
still.
and they would be like, ah, it's, they don't say the word Indian anymore, but they're like, we were
Mhm.
looking for Indigenous art. And,
Mm.
maybe my work doesn't present visually
Mhm.
as something that they would recognize in the image of Indigenous art. That's a big reason for me why I continue to paint and explore what I'm exploring for painting, because I feel like it's my duty to defend the freedom that my dad really fought for all of the visual artists, all
Mhm.
of this generation and all the generations ahead, that there needs to be the same level of freedom of expression so that you can have a German artist or an Indigenous artist, an Ojibwe or Cree or an artist from the world talking
Mhm.
about their experience without having to have heavy signals, cultural
Mhm.
signals present. And I
Mhm.
think that that's still happening.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree. I think we're further along, but I don't think that the
Absolutely.
issue is behind us that Carl faced in the 80s by any stretch. I think there's these pockets and glimmers, pockets of success and glimmers of hope where we aren't having to do those sorts of things, but I still think there's discourse is not really caught up, and the questions keep rolling in, and
And
and I think that this is precisely why Carl's work remains more relevant than ever, because we need
yeah,
those guideposts to be like, this has been going on a long time, folks. Like,
definitely. And I think that that's part of why he gets quoted a lot about the idea that he was making art for thinking people. And I remember being raised by him not understanding racism at all. Like not not understanding it, but then running into it and being really confused by what was going on because he raised me to be so, of course you can, of course you can, of course you can go to these places and do whatever you want. He was that way and we would just be that way, go where we wanted. But we would still run into it. And
mhm.
I think it's yeah, it's one of those things that makes his work so exciting to see even now, that he's talking about issues of being human, and
Mhm.
that his work was about his particular human experience, but not to the exclusion of anyone else's. And
Mhm.
that togetherness that he was able to build in his practice is something really extraordinary.
Yeah, I think that element of humanness, like, it absolutely comes through with his self-portraiture and the themes that he explores. Like, and this is something that I think is something that it kind of is always there, but we don't talk about it. Like, we've been historically concertedly denied our humanism, like
Yeah.
our humanness, sorry. And I think that that's something I really appreciate about Carl's work, is just this raw humanness. Like, I'm a human being that exists in the world, that has had these experiences, and this is what I care about. This is what pisses me off. I'm
Mhm.
allowed to feel the full range of feelings. And I
Mhm.
think that sometimes Indigenous peoples get boxed in. We are still in some ways living with that legacy of being
Yeah.
denied our humanity. And
Yeah, and
Carl was like
also,
saying, no, I'm a human. Let me just be a
yeah.
human.
Yeah, exactly. To be a human, and that was where a lot of his philosophical interests go in and pop out in texts of small works. And I remember a series of tiny little works with apples, and where he was kind of meditating on the an apple is an apple to the tree. It's like the child of the tree, but to
Mm,
the apple is of itself. But if there's like a caterpillar inside the apple is a castle for the
yeah,
caterpillar. There's all these different states of being that we're
right.
all passing through and that unite us.
Yeah, no, that's such a beautiful kind of story. It's also the caterpillar's home and its sustenance and
Yeah, and it's a future tree eventually through the
yes.
seeds. Yeah, but
Yeah, it you know, as silly as it may sound, like that our teaching of, you know, we're all interconnected in all our relations, it rings true when you break it down to that level. And I think Carl was really trying to get that across, like I'm connected to you, you're connected to me because we're stuck in this machine or this world or you know, but I just have a different vantage point than you.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that was really valuable.
I think he returned to that at the end with his second last body of work was The Whale of Our Being.
Yeah.
And that idea was he wanted to use the whale as an umbrella for our collective humanity. And I think it started with this idea of people at the time, there's a lot of save the whales. And he was kind of saying he wanted people to realize that that was only the beginning of a thought. The rest of the thought was that if the world becomes toxic to whales, we're included in that equation. It becomes toxic to us, and that there can't be any meaningful change without a viewpoint of what's happening that includes us. And that goes back to how he could bring people and bring that kind of personal uh, question personal responsibility in the face of these very large ideas.
Yeah, and I think he like really asks or requires the visitor to engage critically with his work and to draw their own conclusions. So back to your point, like he didn't reveal everything. He wants you art for thinking people. He wants you to think about what you bring to the work and how you relate to, you know, the juxtapositions he's making. And I think that that's really it makes it a rich space for, you know, not only analysis but also just reflection as well.
Yeah, this is a really beautiful piece. That's his mom, that's my grandma, sitting
Oh,
by a lake there, probably about 19.
yeah, this work's called Fragile Skies. It was around what time?
Maybe about 1948.
Wow, that photograph.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, and I love that he would do that, that he would mine his personal archive as well as like really iconic images of Indigenous leaders, but then
Yeah.
like Western political leaders and then
Yeah.
kind of, you know, I think there's even some like strips of like, I think it's Mapplethorpe, on
Yeah.
probably, yeah,
No,
in
he was so broad in his image library. He kept an image library of found images, of books, of images. It's massive, and he would work through that. And I remember him telling me once that a really great artist could make an artwork out of, you could take any two images and you could make a beautiful artwork about them because everything was related. So that to me showed so much about his approach, that he viewed it as it was almost like a challenge, but also uh, that it was easy to find the connections, that there were more easy connections between us as humans through our shared beingness on the planet.
Yeah, I guess maybe that brings me to like a process related question. Like as you're saying, he would keep like these archives or these boxes of
Yeah.
or books of images and then would then sit down and decide like what was his process like for picking what he wanted to kind of assemble together for any given work.
It was really extensive, actually.
Yeah.
We have in his archive, was in the basement and now is properly documented and archived. But he kept it in the basement. He had boxes and boxes of things well organized. He had a process where he would collect images. So he had files of images and like extensive, heavy amounts. And then he would re-photograph and reprint them to have them in different sizes and configurations. And then he would make collages of those images and then photograph them so that they became unified as an image. And then that's how he would test to see if that was, oh yeah, that configuration. Then out of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, really the thousands of these photographic collages, a few of those became paintings. Yeah.
Yeah, he was actually included in an exhibition that I served on an advisory for called In Our Hands. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, they chose Burying the Ruler for that exhibition out of the National Gallery's collection. And yeah, and I don't think like people necessarily initially think of Carl as a photographer, but that was so
Yeah.
much a part of the process.
Yeah, it really was. And they also, I think because at the time it had to be this singular, he was such a singular man. It was so like there there was this thing of like, there he goes, but there were so many people involved and so many people, and he worked so closely with my mother, and it was really tough to watch the lack of credit given for an artist's spouse, because ironically, the heavy amount of photographs that are used in his work, they're her photographs. And they're her videos that she took of him, that like they were working in concert. So if you see Carl Beam in the photo, guess what? I felt like this as an assistant in there, as an art student and as an assistant. I remember feeling like saying, if Carl Beam's in the photo, folks, he didn't take the picture. You know, and it was my mom. Although, you know, it was I wouldn't say it was a collaboration. They knew it was very clearly his work, but just saying that's something else too. That's an interesting. Yeah.
I think that's such an important point to make, you know, for those of us that love Carl's work, to understand it in context of this family unit, of this network of support that helped him to create his work, even in the community, from what I understand, and the, you know, the resources that he would gather from the land for some of his, you know, more assemblage-based or mixed media work. And I think that you're making a really important point. It was sets of relations that helped Carl, the relations he would make between things, but then the
Yeah.
relations that supported the practice too. And you know, it makes me wonder, in some instances, should Anne be, you know, co-credited as the creator of the work?
I think that she definitely should in certain respects, like as far as ceramics, because there's a lot of his ceramics that she built because she was the better builder. I hate to throw him under the bus at this point, but
No,
I know
but I think that's really
he
beautiful that
factually
it was
would
like
agree.
something they did
Yeah.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like uh anybody who knew them at that time, and actually I think that somebody who's on this Zoom, uh Miss Wolf maybe remembers them working at the Gardner, and just how they were always together. They were absolutely inseparable to their practice, and really helped each other with a lot of things.
I think that's so great. It's true. Like a lot of people think of the artist as a singular individual, like this individual genius, and yet there's so many things that go into, so many people that contribute to that genius, which I
Yeah,
think
I
is
don't think it doesn't diminish
not at all, not in my
the
view.
capacity of his work at all, any way, to accept that. I think they really viewed themselves as almost, I think I'd heard them say it a few times, that they were almost like a pre-industrial family, that they felt that way because of the way that they were living without the time clock. And it kind of changed, you know, as they went on, but they had this experience, and also leading into me learning more homeschooling and apprenticing with them, really was kind of an experience that was a little bit out of time for the 80s.
Mhm. Could we just step back, Shauna, to there's an image of Carl as a young boy. It's portrait as John Wayne, probably. This
Yep,
one
yep,
here.
yeah.
Yeah. So how old is he here?
Oh, I think he's like 8, 7, 8.
And is that before he went off to residential school or around the time that he went?
That's about the time that he went, I think. And that's him in the photo underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the boy who's smiling really big and has his arm around his friend. He's in the front
Oh, in
middle.
the bottom right?
Yeah, in the bottom right photo, he's
Okay.
in there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know. I knew that the two portraits were of him, but I didn't realize he was in the other photo.
Yeah, yep,
Third
that's
photo.
him.
That is really cool. It's kind of like a timestamp of different phases of his life.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. The image of him on the left holding I think that's a buffalo skull.
That's what it
That
looks like to
kind of
me. Yeah.
that's kind of from that time where he was doing a lot of his more darker late 70s era.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely do see that transition in his work from, because I've curated works from different phases of his career, and you definitely do see that shift in his practice from kind of really dark and
Yeah.
heavy sort of works to some things that are a bit more, I don't want to say ethereal, but like a little bit light. And then he gets heavy a bit again in the early 90s with
Yeah. And then he
Smith
comes
and
out again
then
into
he
a
comes
more
out
kind of
again and
joking and more humorous too.
yeah, they're actually at McMaster Museum of Art, my previous institution. We had a number of the works that he produced, like close to his passing. I think it's like late 90s, early 2000s, which are all these like Hollywood portraits.
Yeah. And
And they're
they're
all like super colorful and funky and they're of celebrities.
yeah, yep. That's when he was doing the will of our being
Yeah.
and there were so many things under the umbrella of well really like under the umbrella of commodification and
Mm-hmm.
culture and like what you're imposing on people or
Mm-hmm.
what you're assuming about people. He was just endlessly interested in the world.
Mm-hmm. I share that curiosity. I always say to my brother, my nephew is at that stage of his life where he's like asking why 1,000 times a day. And I was the exact same way. And I just remember always being stifled like by teachers or others, not my family directly, but you know, why are you asking why? Some things just are the way they are. And I never accepted that answer. I was like, but why? Why? And even to this day, I'm very much still the same of always asking why, like what's the intention behind why this? And I think I feel like Carl was kind of the same. He was always digging deeper than just what's on the surface.
I think that's why the interest in his work persists in that way
Yeah.
because he invites you to keep asking why
Yeah.
and exploring different meanings. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like we could talk endlessly
Yeah, yeah.
about Carl. But I am mindful of time and I just wanted to leave a bit of time for any audience questions. If anyone has any burning questions they'd like to ask Anong, this is the time. We have the foremost expert on Carl Beam. And it's just been so great to chat and um, I'm opening the floor to any questions if anyone has any, or we can just keep chatting.
Yeah.
Hang.
Well, we'll give them a minute to see if anyone does. I don't know that how I know if they did,
I
but
think the
oh,
AGG folks
oh, yeah.
will. Oh, wait. Let's
Oh,
see.
was Carl active online? Um, no, not he wasn't really. Because with the internet developing in the late 90s and then not at the time, he was in that we had a computer and he 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 would ask me sometimes to look up things on there. Actually, he did research looking for survivors of residential schools, and
Mm.
he found some early online forums about that, and he printed out the pages of those early online forums, and he included the image of transcripts in some of his works in the later 2000s and onwards. Other than that, he kind of viewed it like he I think he saw the way it was going maybe before, well, definitely before me. I thought, oh, this is really interesting. This is it's very school and academic and knowledge. And
Mhm.
he understood that it was going to be commerce, uh,
Mm.
very, very heavily.
Mhm.
Oh, about my art and beam paints, did my father? Yeah, absolutely. My father completely inspired beam paints. I actually started beam paints on his birthday. And that's the official birth date. And I did it purposefully to connect with him because at the time I did it, I was coming through a really difficult time in my personal life, leaving a really not good relationship. And I had two young sons, and they were the age that I was when I started learning these kinds of things with my dad and my mom and dad. And I wanted them to connect with that knowledge and kind of connect with him. I wanted to connect with him and feel that closeness. So that's when I started doing that. And uh I would take the boys out. They were 3, 4, 5 at the time, about the same age that I was. And we would go out to rock cuts and go rock hunting, and I was showing them this rock and that rock, and just the enthusiasm of interacting with the natural world that way
Mhm.
and getting them comfortable with doing that. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun for me. And I mean, at the time, Minecraft was a big thing too. So I remember them like, imagine you're that age and your mom gives you some goggles and some pickaxes and says, have at it. And it was they really enjoyed the time too, I think. And it grew into that, into beam paints slowly over a lot of years. Uh,
Yes, so Beam Paints, as I understand it, from following you folks on social media, I'm
mhm.
not as super active on socials, but I try. They're all natural, correct?
Yeah, well, it's more that they're plastic free. We're trying to reimagine a delivery of art supplies that doesn't rely on plastic to be the holder. Like quite a lot of tubed paints, watercolor paints are all so heavily plastic. The
Right.
other thing too, and this is partially because my dad did pass away very young, 62, and my mother developed Alzheimer's and is in a long-term care home.
Oh, I
And
didn't know Anne was in a home now.
yeah, she is. And she's nonverbal, and I completely I really blame I hold culpable the art supplies that they used. I think everyone who knows a printmaker or an someone in etching understands how toxic
Yeah.
those pastimes are.
Mhm.
Also, the works that they used oil paints, they had cadmium and lead, and
Mhm.
even though you maybe try your best, you still have an engagement with solvents and turpentines and heavy metals that are in those colors. So that was really key for me in the art supply development, that I wanted to find a way to we actually third party test everything that we use to make sure that it's free of heavy metals or anything toxic. I could go talk a lot about paint, but we'll try to avoid it. It's too much
No,
fun.
I think that that's so important because I've heard of other Indigenous artists kind of suffering from a similar condition in their later years, and
Mhm.
and
If it's
yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky for artists, and I definitely think that art schools now probably do a better job of
Mhm.
education regarding it.
Yeah, like workplace safety, women's
Yeah,
type.
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. No, I count my blessings then that I got to chat with your mom on several
Yeah,
times.
I know.
Several
I know
times.
she really enjoyed it. She,
Yeah.
talking with you. She referenced it a few times to me later on, how much she enjoyed
Yeah.
that.
That was early in my career too, so I just feel really lucky that I got to at least have some time with her over the phone, many chats,
Mhm.
and she was really supportive. And that as a young, like, emerging curator, with such a huge and influential figure like Carl, and then somebody being like, he would have loved this. And you're like, it makes you feel so good.
Yep. Oh, this, okay, I see another
Yeah, we
question.
got some more questions. Sally has one about text in connection to the radio station.
Okay. Oh yeah. So I think around 2003, he started there's up on Manitoulin Island, I think anyone who is close with Indigenous communities knows of the struggle to preserve languages and to retain after how decimated they were through the school systems.
Mhm.
And he, as a student of text and language and someone who was spending a lot of time thinking about this, he really looked at it and said, this is an oral language. We can't save it or we shouldn't limit our efforts to save this language through repeating it through text because it's
Mhm.
an oral language. He really believed that radio was the best tool that it was best equipped to capture and preserve and share the actual spoken sound of the language, and that it could be a great tool for language revitalization and recovery. And he started Gima Radio as a pirate radio station because that's how he did things. He just did it. He didn't think about, what might happen.
He's
And
like, he's the type of person that's like, ask permission later.
yeah, right. Like he didn't have a lot of time. He just had to just do it. And
Yeah.
he used to say, "Work first, eat later." Like he was constantly on the move that way. So he started it, but it was before the development. Like there were no iPhones or iPods back then. They were just about to come out. And I think after he passed away, and around the time of the birth of my first son, I really wanted to do something to connect with that and to hear the language again, because I was really struck by the fact that with him passing, no one was speaking to me anymore. Like I just wasn't hearing, because he would speak, he recovered his language and he would speak quite often, and he was using it, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. And we went into actually going, that was the start of a big journey for me, trying to get it licensed and to do it properly, which was incredibly difficult and really shouldn't have been.
Mhm.
And that's kind of led to, there's hopefully good changes going on in CRTC broadcast, Indigenous broadcast policy. But his
Mhm.
radio station is actually running. I'm not involved with it. It's got its own wings, and it's a not
Mhm.
certified not-for-profit, and it has its own employees, and they broadcast out of the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation in M'Chigeeng. And you can listen to it if you Google gimaradio.com. It streams 24/7.
That's amazing. I'm so glad that he's left a legacy all over the
Yeah.
place in so many
Yeah.
different ways, both in his home community as well as across the landscape of Indigenous art. I just, this is a bit of a foreshadow, but I'm working on a project with AGG, and Anong's aware of it, of inviting artists to kind of reflect on Carl's influence on their practice, and looking at that multi-generationally. So folks who have just graduated from art
Mhm.
school and study Carl, to folks that were his contemporaries. And I think his legacy lives on through his contributions, and I don't see anyone slowing down on engaging with his work, especially once your book comes out. I feel like it's going to be like
Yeah,
very
I'm
hot.
really, I'm, I'm really excited about that. It's been on on the go for such a long time. So hopefully it should be out this fall.
Yeah, I just want to call attention to some comments that we received in the chat and the Q&A section, just some expressions of gratitude and thanks from Diane and Christine. You know, thank you for sharing your experiences with Carl's work with us. I feel like everyone in some way, I feel like we could just keep talking, but
Yeah.
but Shauna,
Probably,
did you want to exit out of the PowerPoint?
I'm
We
coming
could
back just
see-
to thank you both, and thanks to Sally for being here, who curated pieces of the puzzle. And just as we wrap, there's Carl actually did talk about this idea of puzzle. And he said, my works are like little puzzles, interesting little games. I play a game with humanity and creativity. I ask viewers to play the participatory game of dreaming themselves as each other. In this, we find out that we're all basically human. So
I love that
Yeah.
quote. Sally and I, we chatted about the title, and I was like, Carl, it's like a puzzle. He never gives you all the pieces. You got to piece it together yourself. So kudos, shout out to Sally for running with the title.
Yeah. So thank you all for joining us. Wonderful conversation, I think, and just so, you know, great dialogue and really informative as well. I hope you will all return when we do the project with Rhéanne in the offing, and do come by the gallery anytime if you're in Guelph. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Marcy Miigwech, Anong, for this chat. I really appreciated a chance to connect with you again. So
Yeah, I really appreciated it too. Thank you. And thank you to everybody. It's really great to see his work being talked about in this way. Okay.
we're gonna do more of it. It's gonna happen again. We'll
Yeah,
have it 2.0.
Definitely.
Yeah, we have to do 2.0.
2.0.
Okay.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Be
Bye.
well.